We share these streets. True tales of everyday folk in bygone Nottingham. Episode 6. Tram Tales.
This tram is for Clifton South. The next stop is South Church Drive North.
Love them or loathe them, the trams are an established part of Nottingham city centre. When they're running fine, they provide straightforward journeys that might otherwise be problematic. It's unfair perhaps, but we talk about them most when they're late, overcrowded or cancelled. I should know. I've grumbled plenty of times about the trams, but in truth I've had far more successful journeys on them than I've had problems. The tram system we have now was opened in 2004 and was expanded in 2015. It's a 20-mile system stretching from Clifton and Towton in the south, through the city centre, then northward to Hucknall and Phoenix Park. It's really handy for both universities, the Queen's Medical Centre, Park and Ride, the Market Square, the train station and the Lace Market. My favourite thing about it, aside from the convenience, is the fact it goes through some wild, unkempt places I wouldn't ordinarily see. And no, I don't mean Radford Road. After Wilkinson Street heading northwards there's some long grass, and I once glimpsed a fox sunbathing there. It was really peaceful and just watched the tram trundling by. Further north you pass the backs of several old terraced houses, and some joker has painted on the side of an antiquated outside toilet Basford Bog, like it's a local tourist attraction. I always chuckle about that and wonder how many tens of thousands of tram passengers over the years must have seen it. Armchair historians will know that trams were a fixture in bygone Nottingham too, but the modern system isn't a continuation of them. There were nearly 7 decades during which buses of one kind or another were the only public transport in the city centre. The old system ended in 1936, but had started life way back in 1878. The original trams were horse-drawn and a development from horse buses, which themselves were a development from stagecoaches, broughams and hansom cabs. The first 2 services were operated by the Nottingham and District Tramways Company. At the time there was a great deal of scepticism about whether the town really needed trams, and a feeling pervaded that they wouldn't really catch on. One service ran from St Peter's Church to Trent Bridge via Carrington Street and Arkwright Street. The other ran from St Peter's to London Road via Carrington Street and Station Street. These services connected the town with the 2 main railway stations. Aside from Nottingham Victoria, our train stations have always been quite removed from the city centre. The stop for St Peter's Church was in St Peter's Square, about 6 metres from the smaller circle of grass at the end of Wheelergate you can see in 2020. The following year, 1879, a new service came into operation that left from the marketplace alongside the old Exchange building and travelled along Long Row, Market Street, Parliament Street, up Milton Street and onto Mansfield Road. It continued on to St John's Church in Carrington, which is still at that location. The depots for these horse-drawn trams were at Muskham Street in the south and on the north side of the church in Carrington. The horse-drawn trams were tremendously popular, and in 1881 a 4th service was added, travelling between Marketplace and Basford via Chapel Bar, Derby Road, Alfreton Road, Bentick Road and Radford Road. Its last stop was on Church Street alongside the wall of the old gasworks. The Derby Road section was especially steep, and extra horses had to be used to help pull the tram. These extra horses were kept in a rope enclosure in the marketplace at the bottom of Market Street. Legend has it that they knew the routine so well they could be unhitched at Canning Circus and would then trot back down to the enclosure of their own accord, leaving the lads who were supposedly looking after them ambling along behind. 1881 also saw the opening of a short service along Forest Road to connect the Baseford and Carrington tram routes. The horse-drawn trams had conductors on board to issue and check tickets and give general travel advice. One of the conductors was named Alfred, and around this time would have been 20 years of age. He joined Nottingham and District Tramways Company in the early 1880s, when it was slowly expanding and transforming into a connected and cohesive service. Alfred was from Fiskerton, a village just north of Southall. Alfred's father had been a blacksmith, but died when Alfred was just 6 years old. Alfred moved with his mother to Nottingham, who in time married William, a machinesmith and mechanic. Around the time Alfred became a conductor, the family lived at 22 Swanwick Street in St Anne's. Swanwick Street was destroyed when St Anne's was demolished and rebuilt in the 1960s. It branched south-east off St Answell Road and covered what in 2020 is the eastern portion of Jedburgh Walk and some of the southern portion of Wadhurst Gardens. Working as a conductor, Alfred would have earned about 3 shillings per day, which in modern terms is about £10 and was pretty good money at the time. On the Baseford line, a steam tram was put into use in 1882. The incline on Derby Road was considered too steep for the horses. The tram tracks were really designed for the much lighter horse-drawn trams, and so quite a bit of wear and tear and damage was caused by the heavier steam trams. One steam tram car could weigh around 11 tons, and on Nottingham's Baseford line consistently broke down. In 1889 the steam service was discontinued, having cost the company around £1,000. Our conductor Alfred had married Fanny at St Mary's Church on the 9th of June 1887. He was a bright and ambitious young man, and by 1891 was manager of Nottingham's tram system. The couple now lived at number 8 Muscombe Street in the Meadows, which was opposite the tram depot. He was well known and well liked in Nottingham. The Nottinghamshire Guardian on March 28, 1896 said he fills with tact and courtesy the position of manager. In 1897 the corporation, the forerunner to the City Council, exercised its right to purchase the tramway, paying £80,000, around £9 million in 2020, for the service. It formally took charge on the 18th of October 1897. Alfred was kept on as general manager. Under the corporation, services were increased and expanded, and pay improved for drivers and conductors alike. In January 1899, Alfred defected down south to Camberwell and was appointed general manager of the London County Council tramways. The following year the capital's trams were electrified, and he was the first person to drive one of their new electric tramcars. Among his passengers were the then Prince and Princess of Wales and their 2 sons. Back in Nottingham, in October 1900, 9 electric trams arrived and were put together inside Sherwood Depot, which had been built earlier that year. You can still see the depot on Mansfield Road in Sherwood. In 2020 the northern half of it is a pub and the other half is a council bus depot. Heavier rails had to be installed to accommodate electric tramcars, and at midnight on the 17th of November 1900 the first trial went ahead. Among the passengers were managers from the corporation tramways and a handful of senior engineers. 3 tons of sand were also on board to mimic the likely weight of a tram full of Nottinghamians. All went well until the tram passed St Andrew's Church and then began careering at speed towards the city centre. The city engineer, Mr T. Wallace Gordon, who was on board, said, "Whether the driver mistook the accelerator for the brake or whether there was some other reason can never be known, but it is certain that no one on the car had ever travelled on any road at anything like the speed the car attained as it passed Elm Avenue, Babington Street, Bluecoat Street and Shakespeare Street at an increasing speed." Mr Wallace Gordon feared the tram would smash into the old Corner Pin pub, but thankfully the driver regained control and managed to slow the car down. The history books don't record whether any of the dignitaries on board had thought to bring a change of underwear. Despite the excitement of this trial, electric passenger services began between Market Place and Sherwood. The electric cars tended to struggle on the incline up Queen Street, greatly amusing the horse-drawn tram drivers. The following year, 1901, saw the laying of track to Bulwell and a long wheeler gate to connect the northern and southern sections for the first time. The electric trams went from strength to strength, and over the course of the following 2 decades, services ran to Sherwood, Trentbridge, Mapley, Bulwell, Basford, Radford, Lenton, St Anne's, Wilford Road, Cinder Hill, Carlton Road, and even eventually Woollerton Park Gates. In 1915, an army officer stationed at Bulwell Hall commandeered a tram in Bulwell Marketplace to take 17 of his men to Victoria Station. This caused some debate in the city, and afterwards soldiers were entitled to travel half fare. Later, wounded soldiers could travel using prepaid halfpence and 1p passes. There was also a collier's ticket which cost 1p and was available to miners travelling to and from work in their pit clothes. In July 1903, Alfred secured a new role, moving somewhat closer to home. He was appointed tramways manager for Birmingham Corporation. The rarity of an official in London returning to the provinces was commented upon in the Daily Mail, but in the interview Alfred stated he and the London Council parted on good terms. He also promised that he would not transfer to Birmingham until arrangements were made for his successor. Although the trams developed, so too did their rivals. Trolleybuses and motor buses grew in popularity and appealed to the Nottingham Corporation due to lower running costs. In 1928, the Notts and Derbyshire Traction Act permitted and facilitated the end of Nottingham's electric tramways. Trolleybuses, like trams, drew power from overhead wires but had the advantage of running on normal roads rather than tracks. It took just under a decade to fully dismantle the system. Tramcars and components were sold as scrap or to other systems elsewhere, including Aberdeen and Buenos Aires. Alfred retired in 1928, having spent 24 years working in Birmingham. He passed away the following year. There's some mercy that Alfred didn't see Nottingham's tram system being dismantled. Although he'd left our city in 1899, the success of Nottingham's trams in the first 2 decades of the 20th century was largely down to the groundwork he laid here. It's easy to spot patterns in a person's life from the advantage of the future, and it's interesting to note that the development, rise and decline of Nottingham's trams all took place within Alfred's lifetime. Having abandoned trams in 1936, Nottingham reconsidered the idea and they returned in 2004. The modern system is far more limited than its predecessor and travels between fewer locations. At the time of recording, it's lasted 16 years. By the time it was 16 years old, the former system had more than doubled its routes and experimented with steam. Whether the current trams will last another 4 decades remains to be seen, but it may be unfair to compare the modern world with the incredible invention and innovation of the Victorian era.